Being here today. After all this fog is burning off, it'll be really nice. It looks like it'll be a very nice day today. And just thank y'all for being here. We're here to do some more questions today and see if we can come up with some of the answers, or at least our opinions on the answers, whatever that means. Uh, but anyway, first thing we'll do before we start is prayer request. Obviously, uh, Miss Judy Arvin, we need to continue praying for her. We also have others. Yes. First question, we're going to tag team these questions, I think. But the first question today is in 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4. Is Peter telling women they shouldn't wear jewelry, makeup, etc.? I think the first thing we'll do is read 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4. Wives, in the same way, you submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not care for outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold, jewelry, or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. I'd also like to add another passage here that I've looked at. Of course, Peter wrote this first one. The second was written by Paul to First Timothy. For Timothy, 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 10. Paul writes, I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. okay, if you take this in context, let's start off with the context of that. Verse 1, Peter explains how Christian wives are to submit themselves to their unbelieving husbands and how they can be won over to Christ. So that's the preface to this whole thing, is the wives and their relationship with their husbands. The way I look at both of these passages, I do not see this as, in Peter or Paul's case, total prohibitions of wearing makeup or jewelry at all. I don't see that in this. Really what Paul and Peter are saying is the true beauty of a person is not someone who brings attention to her outer self, but one who performs good deeds for those who worship God. And that's really where he's trying to go with this here, in my opinion, is he's saying that God looks at the inward self. I know there are religions out there that don't believe in makeup or jewelry or that type of thing. I don't think he's saying that at all. I think he's really saying that a lady should present himself with beauty to God from the inside, and it's okay to adorn herself. It's just not okay to make herself the center of attention. I think that's really what it comes down to. Is it's such a place that a person is, adorning themselves in such a way that they're taking away from the worship of God and putting the attention on themselves. In both cases, God looks at the heart, our inward selves. He puts great worth on the inner self, and he wants us to act accordingly. It says, the servant heart of a woman is truly an unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. And, of course, I have one example. I know I've used her too many times, but I continue to like using it. I'd like to talk about my better half for a second. When Kim was alive, she knew the heart of servanthood. She wore makeup and jewelry to enhance her outward looks, but her outward beauty was not a means to an end. She wasn't trying to bring unknown attention to herself because of her outer beauty. Her inward spirit that looked into serving others was a real beauty and a real worth in God's sight. She won others to Christ by her inward beauty and love for others. And she certainly influenced me with her inward beauty. And, of course, like I said, I know I'm somewhat of a homer when I talk about my wife, but bottom line, that's the way I always saw her. Believe me, she didn't mind putting the jewelry or the makeup on and all that, but that wasn't what she was here for. She was here to serve other people. And I know all the ladies here are the same way. They're here to present their inward beauty to God, to worship him. So I'll go with Wes. You want to talk about that?
Well, there's not much else to say about that, John. It's right on the money there, I think, on what we're talking about. But I did want to comment that on something I read is Satan is at work, actively trying to distract us when they talk about things like this. When it's trying to distract you from clothing yourself with the imperishable beauty and the gentle and quiet spirit that it's mentioned of. Satan's trying to talk you out. In his case, talking about women, but he's after all of us. But talking about women not having the spirit, he's trying to talk you out of acting like that, and whatever he can do to distract it. And of course, a lot of times that's what goes on in this world, and that's where the question came in. The first part of the question we addressed, I think, back in one of the other questions earlier in the first verse or two there about your husbands and wives. But Terry?
I really don't have too much to add to that. I agree. I do not think that it is forbidding the woman to wear makeup or jewelry or anything like that. If it did, then we'd be all sitting in here in jumpers and suspenders, and we would have walked here or rode a bicycle or something. It's I think modest is the verse that John just read from Paul is very good to apply to this also, and be modest about it. Proverbs, I looked this up. Proverbs 31:30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. I believe that the focus that Peter's trying to tell us is focus on what's on the inside instead of what's on the outside, because we've all known people that were very pretty on the outside or very handsome on the outside, but were pretty toxic on the inside. And Peter, in these verses, I'm trying to, I keep, sorry, Peter's trying to get us to focus. And the whole, in First Peter, starting about midway of chapter 2, all of verse 3 and first part of chapter 4 is talking about how the Christians are supposed to live for the purpose of converting the non-believers. So he's talking to the believers, trying to get them to understand that our conduct is for the purpose of converting the non-believer. And Christianity was pretty radical at that time because the woman had no say at all in anything that happened. And then Christianity came along and elevated the woman to our equals, the man's equal, and that was unheard of. Right? And so the men may have been a little uneasy, and so he was trying to get the women to understand, hey, if you're going to convert your husband, this is the way you need to act. That's all I've got.
We have any questions that anybody would like to bring up? Well, that must have been pretty good, man. We don't have any questions. Tommy's got a question. Okay. Donnie was saying, if you didn't hear that, he was talking about hit the nail on the head, talking about helping to convert a spouse. That's kind of where we headed with that. Anyone else? Barbara. Correct. Correct. Yeah, Barbara brought up Proverbs 31, which what is that subtitled? The Virtuous Woman or something like that. I think it's how that's subtitled, and it describes the virtuous woman, and it talks about her dressing in purple and making purple for and things like that. So certainly not a sin to dress nicely. If we hadn't dressed nicely, how would we have attracted our mate? Just like, anything else?
All right, since we discussed that, we'll go to the second question. Is Matthew 24 talking about what some call the rapture and Jesus' second coming? If not, what does it mean? I think the best thing we can do here to start with is just at least read the chapter so we all understand kind of what it says. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its building. Do you see all these things? He asked. I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen, and what will the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it you're not alarmed. Such things may happen, and the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are beginning of birth pangs. Then you will be handed over to the persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but he who stands firm in the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful would it be? It will be in those days with pregnant women and nursing mothers. Prey on your flight will not take place in winter on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequal from the beginning of the world to now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one will survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There he is," do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, "There he is," out in the desert, do not go out. "Here he is," in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after darkness of these days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it should be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken, the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord would come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour when you do not expect him. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, "My master is staying away a long time." And then he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of the servant will come on a day where he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I know it's a long passage, but I felt like it needed to be read to discuss this. The question comes down to this rapture concept. And I'm not going to get that deep into the rapture concept, but the bottom line is that in the original Greek of the New Testament, there's no discussion of rapture at all. In fact, rapture was first used in about the 7th century. And so, that's just, obviously Jesus is talking here. So, it's not even discussed thus there. People that believe in the rapture believe that all non-believers on earth would be left behind for the tribulation period. Many Bible scholars agree that the tribulation period would last 7 years, the final 7 years of this age until Christ returns to set up an earthly kingdom during the millennium. And there's all kinds of theories about that. But that's not what Jesus is talking about here. He's really got this broken down in chapter 24 to verses 1 through 29 or 1 through 28, and then 29 to 51. There's really a division here. I really believe, and this has, we had a class on Daniel on Wednesday nights, maybe 2 quarters ago, and it's kind of helped me with this discussion because when we got to discussing, once we got through all the stories of Daniel and the lion's den and all that, and talked about the last half of Daniel, which was very difficult really to understand. One thing that Brian talked about was this issue about destruction through Daniel, after Daniel in his existence, and this is really what's brought back up here. It actually mentions that as I was reading it. It talks about Daniel and his prophecy. But I think in verses 1 through 28, I really believe that he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And I'm going to give you a few reasons why I believe that. Verse 2, Jesus tells his disciples the buildings will be left in ruin in the near future, including the temple. Verses 4 through 8. Now, this is interesting. Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, mentions all the false messiahs, the wars and famines between Christ's crucifixion in AD 30 and to AD 70. A famine was mentioned in Acts 11, 27 and 28, and an earthquake was mentioned by Luke in Acts 16, 26. So all these things that he's talking about here did happen between Christ's death and AD 70. Verse 14, the gospel of the kingdom was preached to the whole world, the Roman Empire, as a testimony to all nations by AD 57, by Paul. Obviously, did most of it. Paul was martyred between AD 64 and 67. That was before the destruction of Jerusalem, AD 70. Verses 15 to 18, Jesus prophesies that pregnant women and mothers would escape to the mountains from Jerusalem when Jerusalem being destroyed by the Romans. So I really truly believe that instead of discussing something that hasn't happened or was going to happen later, I think he really was talking about the time the Jerusalem being destroyed, with the temple being destroyed by 1870, and he's really discussing what would happen in those years between him and his death and his resurrection to AD 70. I believe in Matthew 24, 29 to 51, Jesus is talking about his second coming. Verses 30 to 31, Jesus says that all the peoples of the earth will when they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from one end of the heavens to the other. It says that the Son of Man is going to be coming back on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory and sending his angels in front of him. Second thing, verse 36 says that Jesus says in second coming, but about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. There's verse 42. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. Verse 44. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour when you do not expect him. It doesn't say anything in these verses about Jesus sitting up in earthly kingdom, an Antichrist, or a 7-year period. Jesus is going to come back like a thief in the night. When you talk about Revelation, I know a lot of this comes from Revelation, written by John. If you look at, it was written by John in Patmos in AD 90. I really believe that when Revelation was written, it was written for the Christians that were living on the earth at that time. They were being persecuted. They were persecuted by the Romans, and he was trying to help them remain faithful to God. If you look at from Revelation 4 to Revelation 20, of course, the first 3 chapters talk about the 7 churches, but from Revelation 4 to 20, he's asking them by a code, if you will. He's talking to them in such a way that they will understand what's going to happen outside what the Romans would have understood. And through 4 through 20, in Revelation 21 and 22, John describes these persecuted Christians what heaven would be like. What is the reward if you remain faithful to him? And I really believe that again, I know a lot of people believe in the rapture, that type of thing, but it's not. Jesus is not talking about that here at all. He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70, and he's talking about his second coming and what that's going to be like for us. Yes, sir.
So are you telling us that there's a second coming, part A and part B? I don't see it.
I think that fits right in though with all the directives and is written in the Bible. You know, when Christ comes back, nobody knows when it's going to be, and one will be taken, and one and the ones that go into heaven will be taken, and then destruction of the earth is by fire, and they won't be taken all at once. You know,
The totality of the scriptures, I think, answers that question. That uh, before I started studying this, I really didn't know anything about the rapture. I'd heard about the rapture, but I didn't know anything about it. You see the bumper stickers out on the car in case of rapture or this or something, but uh, you'll be quickly labeled a heretic or the devil if you go online and you start looking for that stuff and you don't believe in the rapture, you're the devil. All right. I don't see anywhere in the scripture where it says that there's going to be a part A and a part B to the second coming of Christ. He's going to come back and that'll be it. I don't see the 7 years. I don't see the or anything like that. So if there's confusion, maybe John can maybe John can square that away. I don't know.
Well, I tend to agree with you there, Terry. I've never read it. I've always thought those he went and got and those he left behind, the ones he got were ones that were going to be in heaven with him. The ones that were left behind were going to be destroyed by earthly fire. That's the way I always looked at it. I never looked at it as, you know, he's got he made a mistake the first time. He took some and he left some, and he's going to come back several years later to take those that are left. He's never said that. Yes, sir.
We know that from secular history, Jerusalem fell in 70 AD. Everything when Jerusalem fell is described exactly in chapter 24. If you go to verse 34, Jesus himself said, there's no one in this generation that will pass before every one of these things happen. And if it's dealing with the final judgment, why does it say, pray that your flight will not be in the wintertime? What difference would it make if it was wintertime if it was the final judgment? You ain't going to run anywhere. Everything there deals with the fall of Jerusalem.
Go ahead, Fred.
I think, I mean, here's the way I look at it. I think the first part has to do with, excuse me, when the Romans came in and basically bulldozed Jerusalem away. They came in, and if you were caught out in the field and they came and the soldiers came, one of you is going to get killed physically. Okay? And if you're caught anywhere when the legions of Romans came in, they're going to take the sword to you and kill you. Now, I think that's the physical part that Jesus is saying here, because they even took the stones as the old ancient kingdoms did, and they even took the topsoil. They stole their topsoil. So in other words, it was destruction where they would never come back. And I feel that that's, if I was out in the field, one of us is not going to be able to flee because they're physically going to kill me. Now, to me, Jesus is switching over, and now he's talking about a spiritual coming once again. So that's how I see it, because he's talking about, like, I think what he's saying about the hour in the wintertime, or he's saying hopefully it's not in the wintertime, you got to flee, and hopefully you're not pregnant. Those are physical things, of course. But again, that's just my little point of view.
I just wanted to say a couple things. I'm more probably in the camp with Pete on this one. I think when I first started studying on it, I didn't really think so, but I more got convinced, and then after I studied that and decided that's the way I felt about it. The more places you read, the more places we read, it's kind of a split decision here. First half is talking about destruction of Jerusalem. Second half, second coming. But there's some reasons I think to think a lot of these things could be, all talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. This was written by Matthew to the Jews, which the Jews were a different audience than the Romans or some of the others, which in Mark and Luke are written to. And if you go to Mark and Luke and look at the same story there, the question is phrased just a little differently. It's strictly was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. The question was in those two places. That's one thing that made me want to think that way, that we were just basically talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. But there are some things toward the end of the chapter that are hard to reconcile on that direction anyway.
Oh, well, I think I was just addressing what you were probably getting ready to say, that it's hard to say that verse 36 is not talking about the second coming of Christ.
I agree. It's hard to say that, and like I said, the more places I look, the more places that's the way it seemed to be. But I had already made up my mind. Now I'd already made my mind when I was studying on this, that I thought, well, it's all talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. The one question that Pete brought up that has bothered me all my life is in what, verse 34 you said, talking about, all this is going to happen in your lifetime.
And 34 is before 36. So
And
starting with 36 then.
I think we're primarily talking about the destruction of Jerusalem.
Let me ask this question, okay? We talked about the generation, verse 34. Will not pass away, and all these things have happened. 35. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now, how do we explain that? I mean, to me,
Israelite kingdom. Heaven and earth passed away for those people. I mean, if you was Jewish, your whole world was destroyed. Would you, if you was a Jew at this time period, was you concerned about the Gentiles?
probably not.
No, it was their whole world that evaporated. I mean, Jerusalem was the center of their world.
Again, like I said, it's second about the coming of the Son of Man, which he did not come at 80, 70. Now, how do we, cannot, it's got to be rectified somehow, in that way. He's talking about his coming. He didn't come at 80, 70.
Do you, let me ask you a question. Do you believe when the final day comes for final judgment, do you think everybody in this world will see the Son of Man?
In terms of going to heaven, you mean, or what are you talking about? Seeing the Son of Man?
Well, but I'm talking about the final judgment. Will everybody stand before the Son of Man?
I think so. Yeah.
I believe as a Christian we will. There's probably some things that we will never understand in our lifetime. But if you read these chapters, they don't change gears in the middle of them. They have to follow a logical sequence. If they don't, the scriptures are not logical then.
Tom, that was my point also, because the next chapter talks about the wise and the foolish virgins. So is that not talking about being prepared for the end of the earth? So Pete says it's a logical progression. So to me, that it progresses right on into being prepared.
uh, when it speaks, the disciples that Jesus was talking to was Peter, James, John, and Andrew. This is chapter 24, and it, I believe he's speaking to the people that are present right then and talking about the generation right then. In verses 4, 6, 9, 15, and 23, he mentions you. He uses the same word there. Also, the word that they used for this generation was the same word that was used in chapter 11, verse 16. But to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to their playmates. Chapter 12, verse 41, same word. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn them. So I believe that everything that he's talking about right there happened in the first century. I don't think that we have to wait to look for something else to happen. And can I explain everything about the rapture? No, because I didn't know anything really about the rapture until I started reading about this. And so there's questions that I can't answer. And I'm not going to be able to persuade someone that thinks that the rapture is critical to our salvation. I don't know how to answer that.
Be ready. That's what the main focus of it was. Let's pray as we close our class. Heavenly Father, we love you so and thank you for the blessing.